see a new bill called Make American Elections Great Again.
I love it.
Forcing the U.S. Census Bureau to redo the census to actually get an account of how many Americans with proof of citizenship are in our area, in our country, redistricting some of the House districts. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll speak for both of us. We love it. Okay, you're going to like this one. I know all about it. We want to bring our elections back. The election in 2020 was rigged, millions and millions of votes. It had to do with COVID and a lot of things, but it really had to do with their crooked people. The Democrats are very good at cheating on elections.
The Biden census gypped Florida of at least one seat. We only got one seat in the last census. Are you trying to tell me that Florida only had one seat in that? We should have had at least two. Texas should have had another one. That could be the difference in the House of Representatives in the majority. So I would love for them to redo the census for 26. My legislature will redistrict those lines. We'll get it to where it's fair.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Donald Trump being asked about whether or not he would throw his support behind a new bill called Make American Elections Great Again that would force the Census Bureau to redo the census mid-decade here to be able to recount how many people are in this country, and obviously that would have implications downstream for what congressional districts would look like. So first and foremost, would this effort be legal?
No. There cannot be a mid-cycle census. There will not be a mid-cycle census. This is all a bunch of nonsense. Donald Trump is probably too stupid to know it's nonsense. Ron DeSantis probably is smart enough. I mean, he should be smart enough to know that what he is spewing is complete and utter garbage. I don't know about the questioner, but no, this is not going to happen. It cannot happen. The Constitution wouldn't allow it to happen. There is not the infrastructure to run a census right now because it doesn't happen at this time. So no, it's not going to happen.
Well, can you explain how we've also heard rumblings of Texas looking to do some type of new maps mid-cycle, Ohio looking to do maps mid-cycle. And so without this new information that would lend itself to creating new maps, how are these states able to engage in this process anyway?
Right. So there's a difference between a mid-cycle redistricting using the existing census data, the existing apportionment, which is what Texas, is being probed or pressed to do, what Ohio is being pressed to do by national Republicans. That the Supreme Court has said is legal and constitutional if allowed for by state law. So states can redraw their districts, but they don't change the underlying data. The underlying data is still the same. What this question is suggesting, what Donald Trump is suggesting, what Ron DeSantis knows he's lying about, is the idea that you will recount the people, by the way, excluding people, which also is not allowed, and then you will reapportion. So like states will get more seats and less seats and all of that will happen. None of that is possible. None of that is constitutional. None of that is going to happen. And, when I watch this video, I am struck that I am not sure if what we are watching is Donald Trump being an authoritarian, being someone who is attacking free and fair elections, spreading election denialism, or whether we are seeing people who know better taking advantage of a doddering old man who simply does not know what he is being asked about.
Yeah, or D, all of the above. I want to dig into this idea that Republicans are kind of going all in on these attacks on immigrants, and they're using what Trump is doing as a permission structure to be able to do that completely unencumbered. Like we are so far past the Rubicon here that now they feel like anything is fair game, and so it's all but inevitable at this point that as we do head toward the proper census, which will take place in 2030, that Republicans are going to try and vie for some change to it where they do only count Americans, even though that's in defiance of what the Constitution actually says. And so who would be the bulwark against a Republican effort to actually be successful in only counting Americans and not counting people, which would include undocumented immigrants as the Constitution lays out?
Right. So it could be Congress, but let's set that aside for a moment. It will be the courts, right? Because the courts will ultimately have to rule if there's a lawsuit challenging how they are going to run the census, as there would be if they tried to exclude non-citizens in that count. I mean, the Constitution is plain as day that it is a count of all people. It is not just a count of U.S. citizens. And by the way, for all the Republicans who think they would benefit if it was only U.S. citizens, Ron DeSantis knows better. He knows better. The state of Texas would not gain seats. The state of Texas would lose seats. Florida, I suspect, would lose seats. Like the idea that they are spreading, that somehow these red states are being cheated because of the last census is crazy. Also, I've got a piece of news for all the Republicans out there, including Trump and DeSantis and the questioner, who are somehow suggesting that Joe Biden rigged the last census. The last census was conducted in 2020, you idiots. Who was president in 2020?
Yeah, that's a good point, but one that they often ignore if it's politically inconvenient. Do you have faith, though, that if and when this issue gets to the courts, in very much the same way that the Supreme Court they don't view themselves as being bound by anything. They're certainly not bound by precedent. They're not bound by any higher court. And so, as it relates to this idea of presidential immunity, they felt completely fine in kind of creating out of whole cloth this provision that would ultimately protect Donald Trump. At the same time, we saw Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which would have barred Trump from running for federal office again because he gave aid or comfort to insurrectionists. And yet that was cast aside in deference to Trump. And so as you kind of look out 100 steps ahead, is there any concern that the Supreme Court might do what they've been known to do, which is to kind of just make shit up as they go because it helps their political party?
Look, I am the first one to be skeptical and concerned about what the courts are going to do. Like I have said 1,000 times, the courts are not going to save democracy. They are buying time for democracy at best. And it is only us, by electing Democrats in 2026 and ultimately in 2028, that we are going to save democracy. So if you care about a fair reapportionment in 2030, then elect a president to the presidency in 2028. Elect Democrats to the House and the Senate in 2026 and 2028 and 2030. So I don't trust the courts, or not that I don't trust them. I am concerned about what the courts can do. But I do think this is one of these places where A, the law is sufficiently clear. B, there is precedent from the Supreme Court and elsewhere and lower courts about how the census has to be conducted. This is not a question of first impression. This stuff comes up every 10 years. Or at least has come up in past reapportionments and census cycles. But also, and I want to come back to this, the Republicans, they can scream all they want on the floor of the House. They can give all the press conferences they want on the street corner or at political rallies. But at the end of the day, there are a bunch of Republicans in Congress who don't want to lose their seats in states that, in fact, count properly under the Constitution.
Right.
There are a whole bunch of Republican state legislatures that don't want federal funding to be cut because they undercount in their state. I mean, the census is not just some messaging operation. It is both the way in which we allocate congressional seats, but also how we allocate a lot of resources from the federal government to the states. And so what we tend to find is Republicans talk a big game, but that when it comes down to it, they actually do the thing that is in their state's best interest and their own political interest. And that is not going to be this crazy idea that is being thrown out here.
I want to jump back into the question I had about Texas's effort to draw new maps mid-cycle. They're obviously doing this because they see some benefit for themselves in kind of squeezing out a few more seats if they can gerrymander themselves into an even bigger majority there. Is there some concern that if you actually gerrymander these districts too tightly, that you can end up cutting away at your margins to the point where these seats are actually eligible to flip? And so they can kind of screw themselves out of majority by trying to entrench their majority even more.
Yeah, that's always the concern and always the trade-off. And it gets to be a bigger trade-off and concern when you are the party that holds the presidency in midterm elections. And the reason why is that you assume that there will be some natural bias against your party in the midterm elections. But trying to gauge whether it is a ripple, it is a wave, or a tsunami is really, really hard. And we've seen all of those things. In 2022, it is not that Democrats did wonderfully in the midterms. They just did much better. The wave against them didn't materialize, and it was more of a ripple. In 2018, Donald Trump thought it might be a ripple, and it turned out to be quite a wave. So like gauging this is never easy. The predictions are never 100% correct. And if you screw around and spread your districts too thin by trying to gerrymander, and then all of a sudden the gains that you think you are making with Hispanics, for example, in Texas, Republicans have been making gains with Hispanics, and you think that that is a permanent state of affair, if that then recedes, all of a sudden you wind up losing a bunch of incumbents. So this is going to be a decision they're going to have to make. I sort of think Republicans are not going to do it because they are not going to want to run that risk. And I think particularly after they just voted to strip health care from millions of Americans so that a handful of billionaires could get a tax cut. This is a bill that does not poll well. The American people understand what's going on there. I think that they are going to be in much more of a defensive crouch going into the midterms, not a stretch the map crouch.
And finally, let's finish off with this. We spent most of the previous election cycles, 24 and 22, discussing all of these cases where Republicans are trying to gerrymander and squeeze as many seats out of these states as we can. In many instances, at least aside from places like Louisiana, where Democrats were granted an opportunity district, and Alabama, where Democrats got an opportunity district, the Republicans were largely successful in being able to do that. They gerrymandered the hell out of North Carolina. They gerrymandered the hell out of Florida. They were able to do the same thing looking at Ohio right now, given their far-right Supreme Court. They're able to do that. But as we look toward 2026 and beyond, have they kind of gotten everything they could? Are we going to be looking at a whole other round of litigation where they're going to try to grab even more of these seats? Or did we kind of get past the bulk of these gerrymandering efforts and now there's really no more seats to be gained?
Yeah, I mean, most of the litigation going on right now is by civil rights organizations, Democratic organizations, and the like. So there isn't a lot more juice for the Republicans to squeeze out of this map. It may get marginally better if some of those lawsuits hit. It could theoretically get a seat worse if the Supreme Court reversed, for example, the Louisiana case, although that's going to, at this point, with being first being reheard, my suspicion is that actually we won't have a ruling in time to affect 2026 either way. So they've mostly gotten the juice out of the squeeze. But I think the real question, Brian, is, what about the states where Democrats control the process? I mean, I was somewhat heretical in that I opposed the Virginia plan to move to nonpartisan redistricting. Just so everyone is clear, I litigated the Republican gerrymander of the 2010 cycle all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to unwind that gerrymander at the congressional level and at the state legislative level. Won 2 cases in the Supreme Court and really made those map fairer. As a result, Democrats took control of the state house and the state senate and the governorship. I mean, they won the governorship, not really into my litigation, and they had a chance, in my view, to pass a fair map, a map that would have been better for Democrats than the current map, but a fair map, not an outrageous gerrymander, that would have been a better map and would have offset, at least in part, some of what we see Republicans do elsewhere. Instead, they used that in the way, for example, California did the same thing, New York, same thing. The Democrats, when they're in power, they use these to pass reforms to make the redistricting process less partisan, to make them more, less political, to make it, fair maps. And I just have, you're going to get people writing into your channel complaining about me, but I just think that we cannot save democracy if one side is engaged in gross gerrymandering and the other side is just says all of our states have to be fair. I'm fine with a national rule that all states use neutral criteria, or I'm fine that both sides are at it. But I think that Democrats really need to look at In Virginia, if they retake control of the governorship and the legislature, I think they should be looking at it. And New Jersey, another state that has a bipartisan process.
Right.
I would encourage people in New Jersey to look at it. That's before you get me even started on California, where you live.
No, look, I could not agree more. I think that unilateral disarmament is exactly what this is. To your exact point, in a Democrat's ideal world, we often just say, okay, let's just make it fair. In Republicans' ideal world, they're like, what if no Democrats had any say whatsoever? And so that asymmetry is beyond glaring. And I understand in a different era where this may have been a good idea, where maybe you try to confer some goodwill onto the other side in hopes that they reciprocate. They don't. And we're seeing that play out in states across the country, in Ohio, in North Carolina. Every state where they have the opportunity to gerrymander themselves into permanent majority, they're doing that. And until and unless Democrats recognize that we are not playing the same game that they are, we can good government ourselves basically into obscurity, and that's what we're doing right now. But look, I think all of that underscores the importance of the work that you're doing in the courts. Again, we spoke most of the 2024 and 22 election cycle about the cases that you and your team litigated. So from our perspective on the outside, one small step that we can all take to support Marc's work and elevate his voice, which is especially crucial right now, is to subscribe to his YouTube channel. That's it. Doesn't cost anything to do so. But if you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.